I met him at a time when I had already learned how to make myself smaller without anyone asking. It happens quietly. No one announces it. You just notice one day that your dreams have been edited down, simplified, stripped of anything that might sound demanding. You stop wanting fireworks. You stop wanting intensity. You start wanting things that feel manageable. I was tired. Not devastated, not broken, just worn down by years of hoping and recalibrating. Dating apps felt like a second job where the salary was disappointment. Conversations repeated themselves. Men blended together into one long beige memory. So when his profile appeared, I didn't feel excitement. I felt relief. He was tall. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. His face was decent, not handsome in a way that turns heads, but not unpleasant either. In photos, his body looked fine. No huge belly pushing forward, no sloppiness that screamed neglect. I remember thinking, this is acceptable. That word, acceptable, had quietly become my standard. I wasn't a beauty. I'd known that since childhood. I was the girl teachers described as sweet, the one boys felt comfortable around but didn't pursue loudly. My body was always a little too much, too soft, too round, too present in a world that praised sharpness and restraint. Over the years, I learned the unspoken rule: girls like me don't get to be picky. So when he wrote to me, I answered immediately. No waiting, no pretending to be busy. I didn't feel like I'd earned the right to play games. Our conversations were calm, predictable. He asked how my day was. I answered honestly but briefly. We exchanged routines, not dreams. There was no spark, but there was consistency. And consistency felt like safety. I told myself that passion was overrated, that butterflies were a sign of immaturity, that adults chose partners with their heads, not their hearts. When he asked me out, I said yes without hesitation. The date went well, and by well, I mean nothing went wrong. We had coffee. He smiled at the right moments. He laughed when expected. He talked about work, about stress, about plans that sounded more like obligations than desires. I noticed how quickly I adapted to him, how my voice softened, how I avoided topics that might make me sound too intense, too opinionated. I was already shrinking, automatically. He didn't ask deep questions, but he didn't interrupt either. He was polite, safe, unremarkable. I walked home thinking, this is what stable feels like. A few days later he invited me over, casually, like it was the obvious next step. I agreed just as casually, ignoring the faint resistance in my chest. Getting ready that night felt routine. I showered, shaved, chose clothes based on damage control. Standing in front of the mirror, I turned sideways, assessed my body critically, then sighed. This is fine, I told my reflection. You're lucky he's interested. That sentence landed heavy, but familiar. His apartment was clean in a way that felt sterile. Neutral colours, minimal decoration, nothing personal. It felt like a place that could belong to anyone. We sat close on the couch. We kissed. It was fine. His hands were careful, almost hesitant. I responded out of politeness more than desire, convincing myself that attraction could grow with time. Then he stood up and took off his shirt. And something inside me went completely silent. His body wasn't just overweight, it was unkempt. Hair clung to soft flesh that moved independently, as if muscle had long ago given up control. When he breathed, his stomach rose and fell in a way that felt foreign, disconnected. I stared for a fraction of a second too long, not in shock, in realization. I felt nothing. No curiosity, no pull, no instinct to reach out. When our skin touched, my body reacted before my mind could soften it. A subtle withdrawal, a tightening in my chest, an urge to step back, and suddenly, painfully, everything became clear. This wasn't about his body, this was about the fact that I had convinced myself this was what I deserved. I had brought myself here not out of desire, but out of resignation. I had accepted him because I believed wanting more would make me ridiculous, ungrateful, delusional. I had chosen safety over truth. I made an excuse, a headache, fatigue. He accepted it immediately, without confusion, without concern, almost with relief. That hurt more than rejection would have. When I left his apartment, I felt hollow, like I'd finally seen something I couldn't unsee. On the way home, the city felt unusually loud. Fireworks cracked somewhere in the distance, people laughed, taxis honked. Life was happening with complete indifference to the small collapse unfolding inside me. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I'd expected tears, self-pity, maybe anger at him, but none of that came. What I felt was heavier, slower, like something settling into place. At home, I kicked off my shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there for a long time, staring at the floor. Memories started surfacing on their own. I was 12 again, standing in front of the mirror in my childhood bedroom, sucking in my stomach because my aunt had jokingly asked if I was eating too well. I remembered laughing with her, pretending it didn't sting, then skipping dinner that night just to feel in control of something. I was 16, watching my friends get attention effortlessly, the kind of attention that didn't require humour or kindness as currency. Boys opened doors for them, complimented them loudly. With me, they were polite, comfortable, safe. You'll make a great wife someday, people like to say. Never beautiful, never desired, just useful. In my 20s, I dated men who were emotionally unavailable, physically indifferent, or both. I told myself I was being realistic. I ignored the tightening in my chest every time I accepted less than I wanted, convincing myself that compromise was maturity. And each time, a small part of me folded inward, quietly, without protest. That night, lying in bed, I finally allowed myself to say the thought I'd been avoiding for years. I have been settling my entire life, not just in dating, in everything. I stayed in jobs that drained me because they were secure. I let friendships fade because asking for effort felt selfish. I laughed at jokes that made me uncomfortable because correcting people was exhausting. I had confused endurance with strength. The realization didn't come with inspiration or hope. It came with anger. Not the explosive kind, the focused kind, the kind that doesn't shout, but decides. The next morning I woke up before my alarm. The room felt different, like it belonged to someone else. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself without adjusting my posture. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I didn't love what I saw, but I saw it clearly. This body isn't the problem, I said out loud. The way I treat it is. I didn't make a plan. I didn't promise myself transformation. I just started doing one honest thing at a time. I cleaned my apartment properly, not out of shame, but out of respect. I threw away clothes I kept just in case I lost weight. That phrase suddenly sounded like a threat rather than hope. I went for a walk, then another the next day. Slow at first, awkward, hyper-aware of my breathing, but with every step something inside me felt less compressed. Movement felt like rebellion. I started cooking food that required effort, not to punish myself, not to diet, but to prove I could care. I noticed how often I'd eaten out of convenience rather than hunger, numbing myself quietly. Weeks passed. My body changed slowly, subtly, but my posture changed faster. I stopped apologizing mid-sentence. I paused before saying yes. I noticed how often people expected me to accommodate automatically, and how uncomfortable they became when I didn't. Dating changed too. I went on fewer dates. Much fewer. But the ones I did go on felt different. I asked questions I'd avoided before. I didn't soften my opinions. I watched how men reacted when I didn't make myself easier. Some lost interest immediately, and for the first time, that didn't hurt. Others leaned in, asked more, looked at me differently. I realized something unsettling. The world hadn't been underestimating me, I had. One evening, months later, I passed by his neighborhood by accident. His street looked the same, ordinary, quiet. I felt no desire to reach out, no need for closure, because that night hadn't been about him. It had been the moment I stopped negotiating my worth. I didn't become perfect. I didn't become fearless. I still had insecure days, days when old habits whispered that I was asking for too much. But now I recognized that voice, and I knew it was lying. Change didn't arrive as confidence. It arrived as intolerance. I became less patient with things that drained me, less forgiving of half-effort, less willing to translate disrespect into misunderstanding. At first, it felt unnatural, like I was breaking an unspoken contract with the world. People noticed. Friends asked if I was okay. My mother hinted that I was becoming too strict. A co-worker joked that I'd gotten picky. I smiled politely and let the comments pass, but inside something hardened in a good way. For the first time, my comfort mattered more than my likability. Dating became strange territory. Men I would have accepted without hesitation before now felt wrong within minutes. I paid attention to how my body reacted, not just physically, but emotionally. Tightness, ease, resistance, curiosity. I stopped overriding those signals. One night, on a date that looked perfect on paper, the man talked endlessly about himself. Old me would have nodded, smiled, asked follow-up questions. That night, I simply said, "I don't feel a connection," paid my part, and left. My hands were shaking as I walked home. Not from fear, from freedom. I realized how much energy I'd wasted managing other people's comfort at the expense of my own. Months later, I met someone new. Not dramatic, not cinematic. No instant fireworks. But there was presence. He listened without waiting for his turn. When I spoke, he didn't interrupt, didn't soften my words, didn't turn my thoughts into jokes. He asked questions, not polite ones, but curious ones, the kind that linger. I noticed how my body behaved around him. Relaxed shoulders, steady breath. No urge to impress. That was new. The first time we touched, there was no internal debate, no negotiation, no voice whispering, "You should be grateful." There was only response. And suddenly I understood something that made my throat tighten. Desire isn't something you earn by becoming smaller, it's something that meets you when you stop hiding. One evening, lying beside him, I remembered that first night. The apartment, the silence, the moment my body said no while my mind tried to argue. I understood then how close I had been to disappearing inside a life that looked acceptable from the outside. I thought about all the women like me, women who learned early to lower their expectations, to preempt rejection by rejecting themselves first. Women taught that gratitude should replace desire, that stability should replace joy. We don't call it settling. We call it being realistic. But realism without honesty is just fear wearing adult clothes. That night, I stood in the bathroom afterward and caught my reflection in the mirror. My body wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it looked inhabited now, claimed. I wasn't trying to earn love anymore. I was choosing it. Sometimes when people ask why I'm so selective now, I tell them I've learned my lesson. They laugh, assuming I mean heartbreak. But the truth is quieter. I learned what it feels like to abandon yourself. And I decided never to do it again. I don't regret that night. I don't regret meeting him. Because that was the moment I finally stopped confusing survival with living. And once you feel the difference, you can never go back. Sometimes I still wonder, was I cruel that night? Was I shallow? Or was I finally honest? People love to say that attraction grows, that standards are a luxury, that choosing comfort over desire is what adults do. Maybe they're right. Or maybe we've just normalized settling so deeply that choosing yourself looks selfish from the outside. So tell me, honestly, is it wrong to walk away when your body says no, even if the person is good enough? Where is the line between unrealistic standards and self-respect? And have you ever stayed with someone not because you wanted them, but because you thought that's all you deserved? I'm reading every answer.